Greetings, friends. There are a long list of family records in the Bible, starting in the book of Genesis. They are recorded there to confirm that the historical records are true and that the people were real and that God was working in their lives and was never far from them, regardless of what happened to them, whether they succeeded or failed. He was there. Devil or no devil, he was working his plan toward the culmination of history and toward the fruition of his promises. We see the gospel writers, Matthew traces the ancestry of Jesus back to Abraham, and Luke traces him all the way back to Adam. This was to show the people that Jesus didn't show up on the scene of world history as some interloper or imposter, but he was connected to the Creator God from the time of the Garden of Eden and from the time that their father Abraham received the promise that his seed would be a blessing to all nations. And from the time of the Exodus, there was a mixed multitude that joined the Hebrew people. They too had been enslaved by Pharaoh, apparently, and saw something in the way God related to his own people, that they wanted that something, that relationship in their own lives, so they joined them for the journey. As a result of these mixed races becoming a part of the people of God, it became confusing to separate the layers, and it was important to them that they did keep those classes of people separate, because whatever class they ended up in, that involved their rights and their responsibilities legally and spiritually in the society. For instance, the very first class would have been considered the priestly families. They had a special responsibility and they had special privileges. Then the full Israelites, and then impoverished Israelites, and there were several other categories, but at the very bottom of the list were people who were the offspring of illicit relationships. If there had been incest or adultery in their family line, or basically anything that carried a capital punishment with it, then these people were categorized as having a grave racial blemish. Between all of those levels, there were the proselytes. The proselytes were people of a heathen origin who had converted to Judaism. And many of the pagan religions required the women to serve in the pagan temples as religious prostitutes, and it was impossible to know who really fathered their children. So all of the proselyte women were viewed as having been prostitutes at one time, and all of the proselyte descendants, all of the children, were viewed as having not known who their real father was. So even if a proselyte had been faithful for many years, he still carried that designation of having a slight racial blemish. Now, this is important because it means that that slight racial blemish was not just connected to someone who had an impure bloodline, but it had to do with immorality and moral failure as well. The non-canonical books of 1st and 2nd Maccabees introduce us to a man named John Hyrcanus. Hyrcanus was a ruler of the Jews, and he went up into the Galilee area when he was in control, and there he forced the Edomites to convert to Judaism. Later on, that would come back to haunt all of those people, because one of the descendants of those forced proselytes, those Edomites, was a man with the name of Herod the Great. Herod the Great, his father was an Edomite, his mother was an Arab. He tried to convince the people that he was a descendant of a priest who came back from Babylonian captivity, but it's generally accepted by historians that there wasn't a drop of Jewish blood in him anywhere. What he had was a slight racial blemish. Eusebius said that he went into the temple and collected all the genealogical records and burned them. He's trying to destroy any evidence that he didn't deserve to be on the throne of David. And that also explains why he had such a violent response to the kings of the East when they showed up in Jerusalem and asked to see the infant who was born the King of the Jews. His response was, kill them all. Go to Bethlehem and kill them. That sounds like some of the attitudes that prevail in our streets today. People with a slight racial blemish calling for the annihilation of other people suffering from the same slight racial blemish. Because the truth is, there are very few people today who can claim to be thoroughbreds of any kind. There's always somebody in the family line who has a slight racial blemish. Paul told Timothy not to be concerned, not to worry himself over these endless genealogies, and he preached to the Athenians that God has made of one blood all nations. He knew that we have a much more serious problem than a slight racial blemish. He knew we have a sin problem, and there's nothing slight about it. It's absurd that there's such outrage in our country about race, people marching in the streets, screaming at each other about privilege and about what life matters and what life doesn't matter. I'm reasonably sure that there were few of my ancestors that felt very privileged when they were told that their children were pulled out from under a collapsed coal mine roof. But I doubt that they felt very privileged walking long hours and many miles in the snow, the freezing rain and snow, to get to a job and pay them $1 a day. You know the truth? The truth is that we're all unbelievably privileged. Whatever race or ethnic background we have, whatever past we have, whatever insult or injury we have suffered at the hands of brutal people, we have the great privilege today of walking in relationship with the King of Kings, the sovereign of the universe. He gave his own life to free us from our own past and the victimization that's been forced on all of us in some form or fashion by living in a sin-cursed world. I refuse to be a victim. He died to make me a victor. And to behave as anything else is to be an insult to his great name and to the glorious work that he's performed on my behalf. And you know, you can know him too. All you have to do is start with repentance. Come to Christ. Ask him to forgive you of your sin. That would be the right direction.